I want to talk about melodic rhythm and meter. Now, when we're playing or creating melodies, they work in phrases. We have short little phrases, sometimes longer phrases, but often short phrases. And those phrases have rhythms, as well as melodic pitches. There's rhythms involved. So let's look at how rhythm and meter affect the efficiency and efficacy of melody. Now, the harmonic goal of a phrase is usually a cadence or closing chord of some kind. Now, we know this from looking at chord patterns. We usually want to end on one or on a dominant if it's a half cadence. So here, I've moved to the key of F just for variety, so not everything's in C. I have a simple little chord pattern, 1-4, 1-5, 1-4, 5, and then back to 1. Now, the goal note, or the last note of a phrase in a melody, is usually a chord tone of the closing chord. So here's a very simple melody that I've put together. We're using a short melodic pattern here, and the goal note, or the last note of the phrase, is a chord tone. It's F, and we're ending on the tonic. So that's something to consider when you're constructing your melodies, that the last note of a phrase is usually a chord tone on the closing chord. Let's listen to this little simple example. So a simple little melody, but it follows the principles that make it effective. Let's look at the next example here. It's usually good to begin your melodic phrase on a strong beat, and in 4/4 time, strong beats are 1 and 3. So here's that same pattern, offsetting the melody, starting on a weak beat, on beat 2, and listen to how it doesn't really work. I don't want to say it's wrong, because there's no right and wrong. Rules, of course, are meant to be broken, but listen to the effect of having it start and end on weak beats. It's not terrible, but you get the idea that it doesn't lend the same strength to reinforcing the harmony, and it doesn't reinforce the melody. Because the harmony is shifting underneath in odd places, it doesn't reinforce the melody and make it easy to follow along. Let's go to the next example. Now, sometimes a melodic phrase begins with a pickup. You don't always want it to start exactly on a strong beat, but when there's a pickup, it generally lands or leads to the main note of the melody starting on a strong beat. So there's usually an implication of a chord other than the starting chord when we're using a pickup, and it's usually a chord with a dominant function. Here's a really simple example. With this same phrase, here's a pickup added on with the dominant leading to the one chord. Now, it doesn't have to be the exact dominant. It could be a dominant function. I could have put G minor 7 there, or I could have put even B flat would have worked to lead to F. But here's a basic example of a phrase with a pickup, also referred to as an anacrusis, that has a dominant function leading up to the starting chord. And you'll see that it's mirrored here with that pickup there. So that's one way of using a pickup. Let's move on and watch what happens when we displace the melody even more. Now, we expect chords to fall on strong beats, and we expect melodic phrases to end on strong beats. So I've displaced the melody here, and you'll see that it doesn't end on a strong beat, which lends a sort of unsettled feeling to it. So it's kind of an unsettled, uneasy feeling. We want to generally aim to have them end on strong beats. Now, the next example here talks about the rhythm of melodies. It's a really good idea to keep the melodic rhythms simple. Melodic rhythms should be patterns that help clarify the meter, and repeated patterns even help more. We're going to see in a moment or two. But complex syncopations like the ones you're going to hear now, they confuse the listener's sense of following the meter. They're distracting. Listen. Not a bad melody, it's kind of interesting, but it's distracted and busy and doesn't have a sense of contour and shape that sort of is easy to follow along. It might be a kind of style that you're into doing. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's something to be aware of. Melodic rhythms should be simple for the most part for popular styles of songwriting. Now, let's go on to the next example. And here, you're going to see that it's good to use only a few rhythmic patterns in a melodic phrase, like I just explained. And I'm back to my original example here. The use of repetitions of either rhythmic or melodic patterns help to develop a hook. So repetition is a good thing. You don't want it to be too mechanically repeated, but repetition with some slight variations really lends a sense of continuity to the overall shape of the melody. So here's the original melody, and I have this pattern of 4/8 notes with a little sustained note at the end. Repeat it again, 4/8 notes with a sustained note, and then repeat it again with a slight variation where it continues on to a few more eighth notes and then a little closing phrase. So let's listen to this again. So it's not too random sounding. The repetition gives it a sense of structure and order. Now I've developed this example a little bit more. Let me move on to the next example here. And you're going to see here I've stretched out the phrase and elongated the chord progression and the melody. And I've tried to put together some of these principles. Repeated rhythmic patterns gives the overall flow more continuity. Repeated melodic movement and contour lends continuity as well. So I'm repeating not only rhythmically but also melodically. Here I'm ascending. Here I'm doing a stepwise motion, and here I'm repeating the ascending movement, and here I'm repeating the stepwise motion. Here I'm repeating the stepwise movement of 4/8 notes again. I'm repeating the stepwise motion here. And then I'm doing a final statement here where I'm mirroring this rhythm here in, again, a combination of stepwise motion up and then moving up and down in the last phrase there. So this kind of repetition gives a sense of structure. So in repeating either melodic or rhythmic patterns, vary them slightly the third time through, like I'm doing with this. The 3/8 notes or 4/8 notes tied over. Same thing over here, and then over here, and over here. It's varied by continuing the pattern. So we have a nice combination of repetition and variation to lend structure and order to it, but not have it be too boring. Let's listen. So I deliberately left us hanging here. This is a half cadence. We're ending on the dominant as if you want to go back and repeat it again. But look at the structure of the melody. I have this phrase that's repeated here, F, G, A, B flat. And then here, when the progression continues, I change it slightly, F, G, A, C. So it's a different skip over here, and it lends a little bit more interest to it. Even though we have the repeating rhythm, the different melody note makes it interesting and catches and carries the listener's attention. Let's listen to it one more time. So structurally, this is very sound. You get a nice sense of the melodic motif developing. We have this recurring pattern and phrase, and then here it varies. As well as the chords, it moves to the 6 minor chord, and the melodic intervals change here as well. So it's a nice sense of development. You feel like we're going somewhere, and then we're coming back home as we lead back up to the climactic half cadence. Lots of drama in this little phrase. So there's some things to think about when you're developing your melodies, melodic rhythm and meter. See you in the next video.